All right. Welcome to Beard Banter episode 17. The strange floating object on your screen is the real Ian Richardson,
Woo.
live from inside Penny the Van. I'm joining you from Chicago, Illinois. Where are you parked? What city are you in?
We are in Memphis, Tennessee right now.
You're going to start singing some country music. I know it, brother.
Oh, that's right. That's right. We were listening to Elvis flowing on through, right?
Yeah,
Like we're
yeah.
getting close to Graceland, so I was like, all right, Pandora,
Got to
hook
go ahead
me
and hit
up.
the Elvis music up, no doubt.
That's right.
That's awesome, man. Well, welcome to Beard Banter. Most people don't know this, but Ian and I have been friends now for over a couple of years. I
Yeah,
have one
three.
of the inaugural Ian Richardson childhood photo shirts.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
legit. I still have that in my closet. I don't know if you know that or not.
I expect you to wear that on the main stage at IT Nation during the
During my beard shaving,
That's right,
wear
Rookie
the
of the
Ian
Year,
Richardson
brother.
Rookie of the Year shirt. It was so good. I remember
Like
that.
no matter what, nobody like I'm doing the shearing, okay? Like I'm
Oh,
good with
it
I'm good with a
seems
set of
like everybody's
shears.
bidding, but I think that's
Oh
fair. I mean, I think
yeah.
that's fair. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We'll have to get somebody else to do the touch up,
I'm gonna negotiate like some sort of tripling of this thing at the top, right? And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take your beard and we're gonna glue it to Kyle Hensloven's face
Oh,
so that
so
he can
good.
finally have a little bit of facial hair.
Yeah, so good. He's already worn one once, so he knows what it looks like. He has some
Exactly.
expectations.
Exactly.
So before we before we got started, I want to tell people, Shiva says he's secondary bid for the shearing priv. Shiva, I think you would be nice to me, and I don't think you'd cut me. So I think you're on the list. Now, there's
But
some dubious entries that have said they wanted to do it, and I felt like they might want to actually cut me a little bit. So
they're going
I don't
right
know.
here.
Yeah, I
No, no,
didn't feel
no.
real good about it. Like, I'd love to shave your beard for you, Matt. No problem.
Yeah, it's a
No.
Jersey smile right there.
Exactly. So Ian, you kind of first came on my radar with Continuum during those days when we were both
Mhm.
on stage for them a lot, and we worked together there. But where you really found a special place in my heart was in the beginning of the pandemic. Right in the beginning of the pandemic, we all were on this self-help call. Shiva was there as well, right? And well, sorry, we'll come back to this, but you were on the self-help call, if you will, and you really just started crushing it from helping other MSPs walk the crap hole line of the PPP funding side. To paint a picture, this was during a time where the large banks were not actually processing them. The way that you had to bring them in, and the way you needed to structure the money, and the way you needed to repay, all of that was stuff that you were giving extremely pragmatic advice. And so, it was funny that Johnny foreshadowing. Now here you are as an advisor to MSPs. Ta-da! So it's almost like you were heading down that world even many years ago when that happened, or 2 years ago when that happened. But, anyways, so
Yeah,
welcome to the
it's
party.
oh well, thank you, man. It's as I've been catching the Beard Banner episodes, I've been going, man, I gotta get myself onto that, but I need to be closer to having my website launched and closer to
Sure.
having things to hit. But it's interesting. You and I were just talking before we went live. It's some of the biggest value things that either I've been gotten feedback that hey, this was really valuable, or the things that I found very valuable are things that people do without expectation of presenting value, right? There's no
Yeah.
agenda to it. It's just a hey, like here's what it is, here's what I found, here's my experiential learnings, here's kind of from
It's
my
that
spot in
guy
the
that stops you
sandbox.
in the airport and says, "Hey, that step's a little longer than you think. Don't step down that and fall." Right?
Right?
There's no benefit. There was no expected,
No.
thing other than just here's some pragmatic advice that I've seen. And it's those that usually surprise me when I don't know that I've created value. And then
Yep.
somebody's like, "Yeah, this was huge," and you're like, "Wow, that's not even like I didn't even think about it." I think you stated it as, when you do something that you're not even expecting to add value, and then it surprises you that it added value to others. It's something you just do, right? It's your
Yep.
normal, if you will, default mode.
Yep.
So when we were talking about coming on today, you actually had one of the best topics, I think, that's going to pull my chain a smidge. But what was your observation that you wanted to lead in with that we talked about?
Oh, well, like there's just there's this abdication, and I use that word very sparingly in my world. There's this abdication of responsibility in our industry, and I'm going to call out MSPs here around security. And
Yeah.
by abdication, I mean like, hey, I'm going to buy this MDR product. I'm going to
Stay
buy
tuned,
this.
Shiva. This is going to pull your chain too, buddy.
I'm going to buy this breach detection product. I'm going to buy this managed SOC or whatever it is, and I'm good. I checked my box. Cybersecurity insurance will say everything's fine,
Threat
right?
actors be damned. I'm done. I
Two
bought a
thumbs up,
tool.
we're good,
Yeah.
right? Except you got two hands and something's fishy now, right? Where'd
Yeah.
that extra thumb come from? Like, no, there's just buying products and throwing it in default settings, not even learning the products, right?
Or
Like,
the
okay, well,
why.
we
Yeah.
installed it and it should be good and like whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's the guys who are throwing antivirus on every machine and saying, no, we got security, we have
Yeah.
antivirus. You have what?
Yeah, yeah, 100%, right? Like,
Uh,
oh, great. Thank you. Risk popped back up, and I actually know who this is now. This is a fairly secretive human, but
nope.
fantastic. It's that point, right? Like, and part of this is the vendor's fault. And I don't want to be that guy,
Mhm.
but the reality is, if you're in capitalism, God bless our hearts, we want to sell
Right.
product, and in order to sell product, we sometimes resort to histrionics. And if you think about the fact that most of the MSPs consuming security products today are on the lower end of that maturity scale. And I don't mean that diminutively. I just mean we're just all trying to figure it out now. Right. And so when you think about it, the person that comes up and goes, "We stop all threats. We'll give you $1 million guarantee." You are set, bro. Like nothing's ever going to happen to us. Oh, except for all those things that happen.
The
Right.
platitudes, the
Yeah. Yeah.
platitudes of the sales. It's the used car salesman, right? Like this
Yeah.
thing will never fail. Or the door to
Not a
door.
lemon guaranteed. Yeah. Like,
Yeah, the door to door vacuum salesman that vacuumed up a whole shit ton of dirt in the vacuum before they came to your house, right?
And Shiva actually makes a great point, right? So Risk says, listen, it's buy, 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 but nobody internally knows how it works, right? You didn't train
Hundred
anybody, you
percent.
don't know how it works, which is led directly into by Shiva's comment. And he says, listen, take it a step further. Blame
Nope.
the vendors too for not holding them to onboarding or training or efficacy or rollout percentage or whatever it may be. If you think
Some
about, yeah, go ahead.
some sort of minimum viable standard to be able to use the product. And so this is an area where I'll actually call out a couple of vendors like Cisco and Fortinet and some of the old edge security device guys that had some barriers to entry,
Or WAFs even, right? Think about the
right?
barrier to a WAF deployment, right? In that
Yep.
space. So,
Like
yeah,
these guys, you want to get to a certification level outside of, hey, I filled out a free form. You did have to
yeah,
go and take a little bit of education, prove some standardization in your team,
yeah.
etc. To come in and do that. But like with a software product, with a SaaS solution, right? It's, hey, no problem. How many licenses you want? You want 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 endpoints? Here you go. Deploy it out. Here's access to the knowledge
Yeah.
base. We love you.
And
Thank you
and
so
this is
much. And that's
even
it.
this is touching only on efficacy gains,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you think about it, if a product says, "Hey, we're 90% efficacious," which nobody does, they all say they're 100. But
Oh
let's
yeah.
say that product was 80 or 90% efficacious, the deployment comes into the efficacy, right? Like, and
Yep.
what I mean by that is like if you didn't set these settings, think about
Mm-hmm.
deploying an Azure box. Like you could have stigs that take things way to this like deep level of like secure first mentality, but if you haven't done that, then by default, it's not going to be secure. You will have
Exactly.
RPC enabled. You will have all these things. And so that's just the efficacy. Let's zoom out a little further, let alone even establishing that the efficacy of that one product is only 1/nth of the overall security posture that needs to be dealt with, right? In the sense that
Yep.
if you look through CIS top 18, 10 is malware prevention, but you've
Yep.
got email and browser protection, you've got incident response handling, you've got how you deal with your actual penetration testing to determine if things are meeting standard, you've got change control, you've got account management, you got asset management, you've got account access management, you have all of these things that are part of it. And so the problem I have with someone zoomed in to selling Sentinel-1 or selling, and I love Sentinel-1, I don't want you to take that as a negative,
Oh
but
yeah.
somebody zoomed into selling an endpoint product or a point product of any type doesn't speak towards overall need of management and overall risk reduction and risk tolerance. It only speaks towards that one product. And so if you think and believe the marketing histrionics to say, hey, it's tools, I bought the tool, and you
Yeah.
don't have the processes, policies, procedures, the why, the what drives it, the leadership intent, like none of those things, accountability and those things, like it falls apart so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not really delivering security, you're delivering security theater.
Well,
And
and
yeah,
it's the false sense of security that are deployed by these tools is toxic,
yeah,
and it's
bro.
toxic to the SMB. It's toxic to the MSP. and it's
Yep.
toxic to the underlying infrastructure agencies like legal, government, and insurance. Right. The
Yep.
reason why cybersecurity rates are skyrocketing is yes, bad actors are on the rise. Yes, bad actors are increasing. Right. This is the same thing as prohibition. This is Capone. This is the new moneymaker.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you have all these guys who are dropping in 1, 2, 5 tools out of the box, very little settings, very little
And know
maturity.
why. Know why
Exactly.
behind it.
We're like, hey, we're
Yeah.
throwing all these things out because we're trying to check some boxes.
Yep.
And with that lack of intentionality and planning, and forcing the uncomfortable discussion with their clients about modification of workflows, that's one of the things, right? Like, so I can recall when we took over an account, we had there's this little one-man band, right? Like a happy, friendly trunk slammer who
Yep.
got himself in a bad motorcycle accident, ended up in traction, was walking around with a walker or whatever. And the guy did the right thing, called around and said, like, hey, I'm kind of out of the game for 6, 9 months. I need someone to take over some accounts and stuff
Yep.
like that. And we said, yeah, sure, like ship them on over to us. That's fine. And we'll give them an out clause if they want to go back to you. And if not, whatever. We walked in, and this doctor's office is using a shared login, Windows workgroup, shared password for.
But
Not
they've got
only,
antivirus, bro. They're
oh
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Still
Like
rocking scanner to sign
everything.
in. Sure. Yeah.
Shared everything across every situation. But the biggest problem is like the fundamental lack of willingness to talk. So you sit down and try to talk with the doctor and say, like, hey, you can't have your MA.
It's hearts and minds, right, Ian? Like
Yeah.
it's hearts and minds more than it is
Yeah, you can't
technical
have your
controls a lot
MA
of time.
log in as you. Yes, I can.
Yep.
Well, yes, technically you can, but you really can't, right? And you
Right.
can't have like your password taped to the damn keyboard, guy, right? Like I haven't seen this
Yeah.
stuff for 20 years, right? There's a reason why this ended up in Saturday Night Live nomenclature. It's because
100%.
it's a joke.
Yeah, it is a joke.
And so, just but that
Let me
guy,
touch on some comments here real quick. So,
yeah.
Jonathan Schofield says, listen, we need to grow beyond a Band-Aid mentality, right? Now, have you
Oh, yeah.
seen the meme where like the security is you put SIM and it's Band-Aiding this wall that's crumbling and water's coming in. Now you put a EDR tool and it's Band-Aiding this. Like 100%, we need to have a holistic view. We need to own up to the responsibility of guiding them towards, and he even said it in there, holistic security posture. You and I, brother, we're like
Nimble,
separated at birth.
proactive, and scalable.
That's
Absolutely.
it, right? And humble. Like say where you are. Start where you are. I was just teaching a security policy course a minute ago before this, and that's my admonition to them is like write down where you are, be humble and transparent about it, and know that's where you've got to grow from, right? And this is where we get into Dan. Thank you for being here, Dan. It's awesome, and you as well, Jonathan, and Shiva. This is where I think of tool fixation is harmful to the overall security program. Amen. Right?
Well,
amen. Yeah.
I'm going to call out Dan's next comment that there are no silver bullets.
Oh, but there certainly are, right? No, there's not silver bullets.
Yeah, there's no
I'm not universally right. Yeah,
this is bigger than security. I'm just going to hold that up as a sign, right? Because Dan doesn't know it, but he just threw off of something that's off of my consulting website that's about to launch, right? The entire brand promise behind Richardson and Richardson is that there are no silver bullets that exist in life. There is none, right? There's a reason we don't use silver in bullets. It's because it's a soft, crappy metal.
Yep.
But it doesn't exist. You have to have hard work. You have to have awkward conversations. And cybersecurity is a microscope.
You're probably an educator too, right? Like in most cases, you're the educator in the room. You're the one that has to teach your partners what they need to know to survive and the choices they need to make and how they impact them. I'm going to make you answer this one, Ian. So how do you address the fact that not every SMB client can afford the prices that MSPs and MSSPs are charging, but know they need something to protect their data? Go ahead and let's get your tackle on this one.
Yeah, they can afford it. You're just not talking to them correctly.
Agreed.
So
most of the time.
The fundamental thing, like if someone can't afford cybersecurity, then they can't afford their power bill. They can't afford their water bill. They can't afford their building insurance, right? Like an SMB client can absolutely afford the cybersecurity that is appropriate for their risk profile.
And don't spend $1 million protecting $1, but most of the stuff MSPs are doing are well within the bell curve of protection based on the things I'm seeing. I mean, they're way within the bell curve of protection.
And it's framing the conversation, right? Like, it's not the fact that, like, you have to be realistic with someone, but a realistic expectation for someone with a couple terabytes worth of data across their infrastructure, whether it's cloud or prem servers or private cloud servers or whatever, is like, look, you get a ransomware thing that goes rampant across your 20, 30 machines, you're going to be down for 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks, stop all or most production, right?
Yep.
Until you get this back, because there's forensics, there's
Yep.
legal law enforcement, there's restoration, and the only way to be sure is when, like, you have a bad actor touch that machine, you got to dive deep into that machine, right? If it's an endpoint, that endpoint's getting reimaged. But
Yep.
your normal average SMB
And
client
hopefully
doesn't.
you're following an incident response plan that you've
Yeah, right.
pre-prescribed, that you can prove you're following, that has the steps in it. Um,
Exactly. So
One of the things
that's
that I wanted to touch on this,
that.
Todd, is that you're also speaking about a continuity of an MSP working with SMBs. And so one of the challenges that does exist, and I agree with this, is you've always been setting the stake in the sand, right? As we've become MSPs, we start out and here's our holistic pro services bundle that takes care of all the patching and all the stuff and all the things to make you secure. We got our antivirus in here. But then you fast forward 3 years and we need EDR and we need dark web monitoring. And we're going to ask in these other things and we're going to start, right? And so you see this world where part of the problem that we're speaking towards is that we have not been the experts in the room. And part of that means that we have to just keep reacting and keep adding and keep reacting and keep adding. And that doesn't change, but I think you can be humble about it. I think, and when I was doing this, as I would talk to customers and I would ask for that next $25 a human, right, so that I could add in S1 and add in a SOC and add in those things, I would just come up and say, I want to be humble and help you understand that we're all learning this. The world of security is shifting. I don't know everything. It's not all solved. But as I continue to iterate and grow, it's in my job duties to help you understand the delineation in your market. And I wouldn't stop expecting those things right now. As we continue to move forward, we're going to get to a point where it's at stasis, right? And I think, one of the things that Shiva touched on as well, I just want to laugh about, though he's making a joke, is what's an IRP? It doesn't compute, right? But the reality is, I would wager if I asked 100 MSPs right now, I don't even care where they are in the long tail, whether they're at $1 million in business, $5 in business, or $10 million in business, most of them do not have a robust incident response plan that they're actionably following today. I would probably say 97 out of that 100
100%.
would be the numbers. So I agree with
100%.
you there. Again,
When
also
we like,
experts should be accountable. If I come up here and tell you, oh, security is just S1 and you're done, I probably should get dragged out back and have my beard shaved like it's November.
well, and,
So
and so like kind of continuing on that point, though, right? So incident response planning for your SMB, for your MSP, right? If you're $1 million MSP or a $2 million MSP, right? You've got a modestly sized practice. You're 7, maybe 10 people or whatever. You're getting your feet underneath you. Like,
yep.
you can't eat the world, but you don't have to go to 100%. Your fifty
And this
percent
might
is
also
better
be
than
where,
zero,
well, and this
right?
might
Like,
also be where you're partnering, right? This might
yeah,
also be somewhere where
build,
you
partner,
don't
buy.
have the size. Yeah, 100%, right?
Yeah,
And that
build,
speaks
partner,
back to
buy.
Shiva's earlier comment
Yeah,
about if you can't do it, at least know you can't do it. That's what that simply boils down to. If you're not capable of delivering something, and I'd advocate that you pick a framework, right? Whether
mm-hmm.
that's CIS or CSF or NIST 80171 would not be my preference. CMMC probably not be my preference in that space, but those prescriptive controls, and say, how much of this can I meet for myself? Comma
Yeah,
space, how much of this can I deliver for my clients? And those two questions might be different. You might spend and pay someone to protect you, right? And run your side of it to give you that separation of duties. But the delivery of the client might be a different path, or it might be
yep.
less. It might be like you said, where it's there. And I love Jason Slagle for popping in on this. Todd's question is good. I would question if they really can't afford it. I mean, average spend on tech is 2 to 3% of revenue. I'd ask what that revenue is where they can't afford it. And if they
Well,
can't afford
so
protection, they can't afford breach, right? 100%. So,
so I
yeah,
would give three really, really good questions, right? The first thing I would ask the client is, who are your top 3 competitors in town, in
sure.
order? And then I would say, what do you think your market share is and their market share? And what does
Oh,
it
you're getting
do to
into the next
you?
point that you were trying to
What
make.
does
I
it
see
what
where
does
you're
it do to
going.
you when you go down for 2 weeks and those 3 competitors take 20% of your business? What happens to your lunchbox?
Yep.
right? Like that's, you put this in terms that people can understand. Everybody knows who their top three competitors are. Everybody's got a good hold on what their market share is versus what something else is. And when you go down for 2 weeks and you have to do breach notification and you get put on whatever wall of shame you have, right? And it gets around town because local communities do hear about incidents, even though
Yep.
national communities may not. What happens, right? Like, don't take this out of their IT budget, take this out of their marketing budget.
Well,
Find a
let's flip
way
this over
to
though.
market around
Yeah,
security and make
that's
this a
exactly right.
strategic advantage.
Yeah, your other point you made to me earlier, and I'll just steal the thunder and say it. Was this like, why don't businesses take that and make it a strategic advantage, right? In the sense that, yeah, and actually, Jason, I'm going to let Jason's point come in here real quick because this was in reference to the MSPs will figure out IRPs when someone figures out how to offer it as a service. And Jason and I have actually been in a little bit of a private. Have been in a bit of a private working group about this, right? Like just talking about IRPs and how they need to, what we could do to help them as they go through this process and learn that they need, an IRP plan. And he's saying, please do not do IRP as a service. Yeah, Jason, I'm with you and also not. So I think there's some degree of an expertise level that you only figure out when you're doing IRP management in that way. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be a service as much as an education in that
Yep.
regard, or a collectiveness, obviously, where everybody's participating. But I'm with you, Jason, on that 100%. But back to your point, right? You said this, Ian, of why can't someone? I know it was a joke, Shiva. I know, bro. I know, we know. Um, but I think that your point is that if I focus on cybersecurity, and let's go back to Jason's point, where that might not only be more than 2 or 3% of my entire revenue spend.
Yep.
How much more purchase can I get out of that by saying to my clients, "Hey, all these things you've been hearing about security, and all the things you hear about breaches and incidents and all the stuff that's happening, right? All of those things, we are working hard to fight them. We understand they're a risk. We're not going to solve them, but we actually think that our posture is better than your posture around cybersecurity. And there's a couple of things like supporting that theory right now. One punitive and one positive. I was actually reading a industry newsletter about private equity, and they were talking about how private equity is now asking for residual risk numbers in decisions, which means if you want to sell your company, if you want your company to become valuable in a way that it turns from what you and I were just joking about, Ian, play money that's
Yep.
great and it's wonderful and it's built
Into
up,
real money.
to wire transfer money in my account that I can spend. When you want that to happen as a business owner, if that's part of your transition plan, you can't do it without cybersecurity as this world continues marching forward. They're not going to be okay with it. So that's the
Well,
punitive. And the positive side of that, obviously is what you wanted to speak about. So,
and think a little bit like private equity is a big player, right? If you're trying to liquidate the equity that you have tied up in your business, which happens to everyone, right? Everybody will exit their business either vertically or horizontally. Thanks, Arlen.
yeah, yeah,
You really do want to try to focus on walking out the front door versus getting carried out the back. But think about the other players on this, right? The common thing that I hear from folks during consulting is, well, a lot of my clients or a lot of my prospects will say, well, that's why I have insurance. Insurance is never your friend.
yeah.
Insurance
It's
actively works against you. Have you ever done a
yeah.
homeowner's claim? Have you ever walked through the insurance claim process? The adjuster who comes out around your car is your enemy. He's
Yeah.
not there for you. He's there to mitigate the damages that the
Yeah, his
insurance company will.
fiduciary
Yeah,
responsibility is to the insurance company.
is to
Let's
the
just put that
insurance
in perspective.
company. That's who the adjusters work
Good seeing
for.
Shiva. Yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
100%.
yeah, like the risk factor that people have is by banking on insurance. You're banking on someone whose sole existence is to not pay you.
Yeah.
They will find any way to not pay out on your insurance policy. And I
Yep.
don't say that as someone that, like, I don't got any bad. I love my insurance broker. He's a great guy. I know plenty of
Yep.
underwriters. The underwriters are
But you
great
are
guys too.
attempting to transfer risk that you have not
Yep,
even quantified, right? And I think
exactly.
that's the challenge is when you look at that, transference of risk is meant to be the residual risk that you're accepting and then transferring to another organization. That's insurance. It's not there to go, bad guy got me, I'm good. That's
Yeah.
not the way this works, right? I want to
Yep.
speak on this too because I think this is a brilliant point, Ahmad, and I hope I didn't say that wrong. Um, Business owners and CX people, so customer experience people,
Mm.
need to be aware of modern security concepts and why it's important. This awareness will transform their thinking and get their approval for any needed investment, which is, starting with leadership, right? I agree with you 100%. If that's not worth protecting, you will eventually no longer. Oh, sorry, I missed it. It's over here. Um, and they agree to invest in securing their building access and hardware assets. I totally agree. And I almost think if you thought about this in the sense of imagine you're taking a user through a web form sign up. And during that web form sign up, as they put in their social and they see it get, which hopefully your donut shop's not collecting a social, but let's just assume that you need to collect a social as it gets starred out and deleted as they type it. And then a cute little quip that pops up and says, we care about your data, so we're doing everything we can to protect this, and we understand how valuable it is. You could see the story being crafted of, oh, I like them because they're more secure. Why? Well, because they told me, they bragged about it, right? And I actually have a use case of this where
Yep.
a guy in the parts manufacturing space in the DIB, or at least tangential in the DIB or defense industrial base, way early in the 2017 timeframe, around 80171 or 2016 timeframe, he started going hard into the pain of meeting every single piece of it, like MFA to everything, workstations, the backup processes, where they live, and all of it. And he had no financial incentive because everybody else was just lying. His competitors were just lying. But I sat on 6 different rate readiness reviews. If you're never familiar with that, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Spirit, Aerosystems, they all do rate readiness reviews. Like, are they ready to even meet this rate? Do they have the security things in place? And as they went through that, that was their deal maker. Like several of the contracts they got, it was just because at the gut, the person sitting in that rate readiness review said these people are more secure than the guy down the street. And
Yep.
so as you start seeing that, it doesn't play out in every market, and you couldn't do that necessarily about the donut shop, right? But it is something where I agree with you, Ahmad. That's a prescient statement there,
Yeah.
right? And then one more to get into, Ian, was organizations exist. Organizations exist usually due to intellectual property, right? Data, 100%. Customer list,
Yep.
patents,
Yep.
designs. Like, look at Carrie. What is Carrie's data predominantly in her other space? It's the knowledge of all those MSPs and the knowledge of all those, right? It's that level of
100%.
intellectual property. Um, and I think what people don't understand too, that Dan, you're maybe pointing out, and beautiful beard, brother. But the other piece you're pointing out is that the data also doesn't always have to be valuable to anybody but you for it to be a weapon against you,
Well,
right?
100%,
And
right?
that's the
Like
whole premise of ransomware.
the line is that in a small business you're probably right. The hacker doesn't, the malicious actor, hacker, whoever doesn't really care about your data, but
Yeah,
they do care about the point that you care about your data.
100%. Yeah, yeah, 100%. And
Right?
access to it and the ability to continue on your business. And even who would I
Yeah.
call if I was compromised? Like, all of those things are still probably part of those systems that you're now reliant upon that are down in that
Yep.
case. So, yeah,
Yep.
that's a brilliant point as well. Um, so let's get back to this. Like, how can companies, MSPs, start down this unraveling the journey that's been sold to them? Right, that it's another tool. And I wouldn't agree that you, like, if I'm a surgeon, it's not the greatest if I've got to like sharpen up my fingernail and like poke it through the skin. I'd rather
100%.
use a scalpel. So, like, I do agree tools matter. It
Well,
just
yeah,
can't
and,
be the
and you look
tools or
at
the first part.
you look at micro, like in surgery, right? That's a great idea. So you think about back in the day, you might have to cut someone from from gullet down to their belly button, all the way to
Yeah.
do a surgery, which can now be done laparoscopically,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because of miniaturization and cameras and things like that. So tools have a part of
Yeah, the Da
security, but
Vinci
tools do,
robot has a value, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Tool set is not security by itself. It's a key component, but it's just a component.
yep,
And
100%.
so, like realistically, I'm a big Patterson guy. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a Patterson guy. There we go. There's my
Love
water
it.
bottle.
Nice, nice, nice call
Okay.
out. Yep.
And like Tom's, the beauty of Tom's work is that it's simple and easy to understand. And so before you make a plan, you have to know where you are. So
Yeah.
I would advocate that anyone who's trying to get started on this is take a state of the union, right? Where is your customer base? Where are you at today? Gain perspective so that you have a scope of what needs to be done. And
Yep.
you're not allowed to get overwhelmed by perspective. It's just where you're at, right?
Yep.
So the principle I would say is truth will set you free. Be honest in the room,
Be transparent to yourself about
right?
what you're really capable of. Yeah, absolutely.
A big construct that I'm always happy to shout out, and it's easy enough to do in a 30-second thing, is use the concept of the 4 helpful lists. What's right about a topic, what's wrong about a topic, what's confused about the topic, and what's missing about the topic.
Yeah.
So if cybersecurity is your overarching topic, things that are going well, don't screw those up as you fix everything else, right? Those are things
Yeah.
you want to optimize and preserve. What's wrong or straight up broken, you need to fix. What's confused are questions you need clarification on. This is a great time to be talking to folks like the MSPs, like the C-levels, the PAX8s, the industry leaders out there who can give you some resources. These are the times to talk to those toolset vendors and say, hey, we don't understand these 20 things. Help us.
Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
are things
Partner.
that are missing? If you go, wow, incident response plan, we don't even have one of those. Great, probably time to add one.
Yeah.
Wow, we don't
100%.
have a framework that we follow. Great, time to add one, right? So
Yeah.
take a perspective as to where you're at today. Then all you do is go to step two, which is making a plan. Where do you want to be? Set a target, 12 months, 3 years,
What's the
whatever.
aspirational
Yeah,
outcome, right? What's the
what,
next iterative
and not
aspiration?
even
Yeah.
aspirational. Make it smart. Make it attainable. Make it measurable. Make it relevant.
Yeah.
Make it time bound. Okay.
Yeah, something like I'm going
So
to rewrite our IAM policy for how we identify accounts and assets. Like something that's actionable and single
exactly.
transactional in that way. When you find a gap
Well,
and there's something missing or in the
and so yeah,
yeah,
exactly, right? You've
something
got this
wrong.
huge list. When you go through this perspective exercise, you're going to have this huge list of things that are good and things that are wrong, missing, or confused. Those things that are wrong, missing, or confused, prioritize them. Is this a pants on fire, red light, like, hey, our building is burning down because of this, and it's by the grace of God that we haven't had an incident yet?
Yeah,
Or is it more of a green light, like, there's a problem, but we just got to take care of it when we got time? Fix your
sure.
reds first, then your yellows, then your greens. Make a
Yeah,
plan, put it in
all
sequence,
based on risk, right? All thinking
right?
of what has the most risk of impact to me
Exactly.
as an organization. I think it's
But start
brilliant.
with start with perspective.
Yep.
Perspective before planning always. The truth will set you
And
free.
don't lie to yourself about your perspective.
Yes.
Where am I should not be something that's fake that doesn't actually
This is
happen.
not this is not something to
Yeah.
throw darts at, right? Like
Yeah.
people are never the problem in business, okay? You can have processes being the problem, you can have someone who's in the wrong role, which
Yeah.
isn't a
Wrong seat on
problem
the
with that
bus.
person. It's not a problem with the role. It just is a misalignment. So you can have alignment
Yeah.
issues. You can have process problems. You can have documentation problems, training problems, etc. People are not the problem. So don't use this as an opportunity to be like, oh yeah, well Tom over there is screwing everything up and hasn't set policies right. No, it's we have an issue with policy adherence across our client base.
Yeah.
That's
So
the
there's a
problem.
great question. I'm going to punch this real quick because Dan hit this really out of the park. If your security architecture is a bunch of logos, you have a security purchasing roadmap, not a security capability roadmap. Fucking great. Thank you, Dan. That's a good one.
That is
Sorry about the curse
100%
word.
true. And hey, you know what? Like, I'm not going to dog on the purchasers of the world. Purchasing is a real bitch of an issue.
Yeah.
And, like, God bless them, right? Like, nobody likes to be the person in charge of purchasing. Nobody likes to be the person in charge of inventory, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's not dog on our admin team here.
And all I'd say is if you are buying something, if you are adding a new SKU, if you are adding a new logo, you should be able to answer the question of why. Is it meeting some need that was broken,
Correct.
that was wrong, right? Missing
Correct.
something that was right? And am I doing myself any disservice on that regard from trying to do something that it's not going to add value and it's just going to distract me with the shiny object syndrome?
Well,
To Dan's point earlier. So
and that
um,
like I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and I have been for a long time. But
start with why.
start with why is an infinitely scalable concept.
Yep.
So as you are going through adoption of process or policy or tool set, define a why. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things. So one of the things we did at my old MSP was with every policy that we dictated, whether it was an HR policy, security policy, whatever, we always had a why statement. And that
Sure.
why statement always covered us, it always covered supplier, and it always covered customer base. So
Yeah.
the why for this policy exists. Here's the internal reason, here's the customer base reason, here's the third party supplier reason.
And I bet a lot of the times the internal reason that was to secure something had an external reason because I give a shit about my customers,
Yeah.
because I care about not being the mechanism of their death. One of the
Yep.
things that I think, Shiva said really well is that like MSPs from an accountability problem, right? Shiva said, listen, it all boils down to an accountability problem that's pervasive throughout the IT provider industry. And I think
100%.
that if I'm allowed to pontificate a little bit, I think the reason for that is somewhat built into the nature of what we're in. We're in an industrial revolution, in a technological revolution, right? And as you think about that, when you started the industrial revolution and we made a steam boiler, they blew up. right? They killed people.
Yep.
And as they continued to evolve, we eventually had laws. Like the first car was made in 1860 something. The first seatbelt was Ralph Nader's "Unsafe at Any Speed" in 1974. Like
Well, that's right.
let's just put that in
First cars didn't
perspective.
have windshields.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so we're doing that
Yeah.
with technology, and our vendors are building code that they probably should have never built. They are not dealing with technical debt in the same way. We're all growing up here. We're all starting to realize that this is a shared responsibility, that we all have to mature, that we all have to grow. And then it's a time when our constituency and our consumer, their maturity level is much lower than our maturity level is. And I have this theory that anytime you have a product being made and the consuming entity's maturity level is at X, the product will only meet X plus one. I don't think the product will ever massively outgrow the maturity level of the consumer in a way that's meaningful. And I think that's the challenge.
And another thing, since we're talking about cars and history lessons and things like that, a common theme that I get is the dislike of security, the dislike of this. I'm worried about upsetting someone, and like take
Yeah.
solace from Henry Ford, right? If Henry Ford had listened to his customer base, he would have built a better horse.
Yeah. Yeah. It would have been a much better horse. It would not have been a
Right?
car. And it
Yeah,
would not have come in only black, right? That's the other side of
you
that.
can
That's a
have
little scary.
any color you want as long as it's black.
But it does show that if you're fundamentally reinventing something,
Yeah.
you do get the ability to be the one that writes what's good. And if you look at cars from the time that rolled off the Model T assembly line to the time when you started having enclosed vehicles that now had stuff that protected you from rain and had things that advanced the timing for you so you weren't manually doing it, and have those things matured, and fundamental flaws and fundamental weaknesses eventually become worked through. And I'm not saying they're perfect, but the death rate in a car right now is significantly lower than it would have been with the same density of vehicles at the same speed 120 years ago, right? And so
100%.
yeah, and I think that's what we're
Magnitudes.
seeing in our world. I think that's what we're seeing. And back to the earlier point of what about those that can't afford it? A lot of the turmoil in affording cybersecurity today is in the fact that we have no clue what we're doing, and we're starting to work through those things. And there's a lot of burnt efficacy, if you will, right? There's a lot of wasted efficiency, especially. And I think what we're seeing is as those numbers, as the efficacy and efficiency numbers start growing, and you're having a normalized set of variables. If I start a new business today, is there a chance I have a server? Is there a chance I have anything
Right.
with an operating system? Almost none,
Yep.
right? At least if I'm being guided by somebody in the forefront of a lot of these things. And I'm not saying that's perfect. Anybody wants to argue me off on a pure cloud world as to how that's worse, I would agree with you. I would get into some banter as to what the greater good conversation becomes. But if I start a new company today, I could actually walk into a world where someone automated most of my security needs,
Yep.
right? Someone could develop, okay, we're going to bolt it in with this with Intune. It's always going to roll out. We're going to make it to where the conditional access policy doesn't allow someone to bring a machine in unless it's Intune bound. We can start putting rails on it that didn't add a lot of cost. And in fact, they're quite scalable. In fact, if anything, they actually reduce that next cost in some ways. I do think we're heading towards a cliff for that transfer. Back to the first question that was asked about, what if that customer, Todd Blair, that says, what if that customer can't afford it? The shift in that is happening too. And in some ways, the irony is that customer that does have metal in the closet, that does have a 3-year contract still in their VMware, that does still have, they're actually at a disadvantage to the guy or gal starting up down the street that's going to be that fourth competitor on Ian's list. And
Mm-hmm.
those people will start taking market share. They'll be easier to attract talent. They'll have more security. They can have endemic security that's the same for most, which means as it fails systemically. And as it gets fixed systemically at a core level because all the bolts look the same. It's like trying to play with just Legos versus Legos and Duplos, and I got some assembly and I got a couple Lincoln logs. Like that's
That's
not
right.
easy. But when it's all Legos, the twos and the fours go together to equal twos and fours. Like that's the way it works. Yeah,
It's
so
really simple to also multiply them to an 8 or a
100%.
10,
Yep,
right?
because you have this law, this standard, a standard. Shit, like, that's
Yep.
exactly what it is. It's a standard, and you start getting into that world where you could develop a standard for the bell curve of humans that's significantly cheaper, but a hell of a lot more efficient and hell of a lot more efficacious in the same right. So, there's hope. Damn it,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of work to go through between now and then.
Well, and so like what you've said too is another good conversation to be having with your average business owner. Business owners are never going to understand technology. They're
Right.
never going to understand security, and asking them to is unreasonable.
Yeah.
But what they can understand is competition and market forces. And
Yep.
so painting a picture of, hey, look, we can do some investment in our future here, but by shifting some of the ways that we fundamentally do business, which will take time, sweat, blood, and treasure, right?
Mm-hmm.
It will take effort, it will take resources. We can capture nimbleness back. We can
Yep.
capture the ability to pivot. We can capture the ability to rapidly scale. We can
Yep.
get back some of the earlier startup mode things that made us able to grow fast. And if
Yeah.
you're able to paint a picture where security can become the wind in their sails,
Yeah. Thank you, Bette
that by
Midler.
building a scalable, secure architecture, by being able to pivot rapidly, they're going to
Yeah.
be able to move faster than the other three guys down on the road and be able to match punch for punch the new startup that's
Yeah.
just coming out that might not be a competitor yet. That's kind of the joke around the water cooler. Well, it's only going to be a joke until they eat your lunch.
100%.
And if
Yeah.
you are able to paint that sort of a picture where you're
Netflix
pairing
Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster had all the
exactly,
momentum in the world,
oh
and yet
yeah,
they couldn't change their direction,
yeah.
and Netflix crushed them
Yeah,
very
and now
rapidly.
now Blockbuster. Is there still one left?
I
Right,
think
like
there's one according to the video that I
yeah,
watched a while back.
everybody's
But
searching for the one Blockbuster store, right? Like when you
yeah,
find that one, throw it up on social, tag me.
and the other neat thing about technology that's cool to describe is like I'm going to give you two experiences. I want you to sign into your phone and install Angry Birds,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it, and then play it. Or I want you to go get angrybirds.exe and make sure it's the right version that's been kept up to date and ensure that the operating system on the phone is set that C is the local path. The variables must be set. We have to make sure that we actually are thinking about the security and the architectures we install. We're starting to head down the world of a more of an Angry Birds experience where things just
Well,
work,
it's
where the deployment's just scriptable, right?
just
And that's
this
it.
didn't
And
e- this didn't exist
what,
15
15 years
years
ago?
ago,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, at
Like
all.
that's kind of the that was one of my favorite things whenever we were talking about asset purchase cycle, was I just
Yeah.
held up the phone and say, when did this come into your world?
And how many of these have you had in that
Uh,
15 years?
and
Right?
then that's what
Yeah.
really drives it home, where they're like, oh, now I
Yeah.
understand. Yeah, you're buying a new phone every 18 months,
Yep.
and
And
I'm
probably have
asking you
a
to
fleet of
replace your
dump
computers every
trucks.
3 to 5 years.
And probably have a new fleet of dump trucks in that same 3 to 5 years every time,
Yep.
right? Like, or some, and maybe I'm being hyperbolous on dump trucks themselves, but certainly vans and delivery vehicles and things, 3 to 5 years, right? So I
100%.
think the point is that people have treated IT as a cost center all the way back to Todd's question, and it's our job to educate them that it's not. They're taking
Yes.
it for granted, and I think it's interesting because they're taking it for granted as it is becoming commoditized.
Yep.
Like what we do is becoming a commodity. If it's a script that can set something up the same way every time, at some point that's commoditized, and you have to find
Well,
other value statements.
and getting yourself redefined before this wave of regulation, before this wave crashes down all over our head, right? And the
Hundred
water goes
percent.
up to here instead of
Yeah,
being right here, right?
yeah.
While you're still swimming and you can still touch your feet on the ground and bounce up, start redefining your business, start redefining that value prop. And if that means that your team has to retool and that you have to redefine yourself and you have to jump the curve, and maybe you're
Yep.
not billing per endpoint or per whatever anymore, that's fine,
Yeah.
right? Like I've yet
I
to meet
love
an
hearing your
MSP.
jump the curve lingo come in. That's an old
Uh-huh.
ConnectWise combo that heard it
Oh
many
yeah,
other places before, but I just love the etymology of that coming up.
oh
It's
yeah, the
fantastic.
curve jump. Good old,
Yeah,
good
yeah, yeah,
old
yeah, yeah,
HTG talking about
yeah.
ooh,
I
whoop,
love it though. I
right?
love it
Like
though.
oh
Jump the
yeah,
curve. Yeah, I love
jump
it.
the curve, right? But it like redefinition. Okay, if you talk to the folks who are get defined as serial entrepreneurs, who
Yeah,
redefine themselves. I got a buddy who started out as a painter and then went to a financial advisor and now is a venture capitalist.
yeah.
In between there, he became a pilot, right? And what he is really is a change junkie, right? He's
Yep.
slapping the arm because he needs to redefine himself
So
every
you're
7 to 10
defining my
years.
life. Like I had my Series 7
Yes,
66
you.
LHVA, banking,
Uh,
mortgages, right? Non-numismatic, numismatic gold, diamonds, and then
yeah, I was
technology.
going to throw the
Yeah.
diamonds in
Yeah,
there.
diamonds
Yep.
the last one before technology.
Yeah.
But then technology, and what's cool about technology as a change junkie is you can reinvent yourself
Mhm.
and selves thousands of times and stay in the same field, right? I want to be in cybersecurity. Which of the 100 genres do you want to be in, right? Like,
Exactly. And
yeah,
so that's
100%.
that's the thing, is that because security is so fast paced, there is an absolute opportunity for the MSPs that want to capture it to invest hard into a space and become
Yep.
specialists. How
Yeah.
many of you don't want to take help desk calls anymore? How many of you guys don't want to care about a server going down? How many of you guys want to get out of that? Like, you can define yourself and broaden scope. It's a remote world. It's a you don't have to be face to face type of world. You can be doing some Zoom calls and things like that, and
Yep.
redefine the way that you do that. If you don't believe it can be done, go talk to Eric Taylor.
Oh, reinvented himself in the
who
last 2 years. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
who completely reinvented himself. And like, Eric and I grew up in this space together. And I
Yeah.
remember commiserating over beers at virtually through chat channels in an IRC and things like that, where Eric was spinning the wheel, spinning the wheel, spinning the wheel, spinning the wheel on
Yeah.
growing an MSP, and then finally said, like, F it, I don't want to do this anymore, and redefined himself into the space. You absolutely can do that.
Yeah.
And your
Especially
team
because there's
can.
no definitions or barriers to entry today, really.
Right
And I
before
joke.
it gets regulated to hell, you might as well do it.
Yep. And joking aside, I think Jessica just called me old because that means I'm 93.2 years old based on the overall cybersecurity experience I contain. So no,
Uh-huh.
but seriously, there is a problem with that. And Todd, like you actually crushed it today. Thank you for saying that, right? Like, but you crushed it today because I referenced your question many times, and I'll reference it to close out. The other option, if that customer or that partner doesn't have it in their budget to do it because of self-ascription or actuality, there's times not to take on that risk. There's times to choose what you're doing. Back to Ian's point, right? You don't have to have the servers because some jackass is the guy that says I'm not getting rid of it. You can make a choice,
Yep.
and you can make a choice that helps set you up for success and scalability and flexibility. Back to the original point, we're making advocations to our customer base. So yeah,
Uh,
Todd, thanks to
well,
having you here, man. It was great.
and so, like, to take that point one step further,
Yep, close
and
us
I
out,
know,
Ian. We're over time. Let's wrap
I
her up.
know, I know this is like painful to hear, and everyone says it in a different way. But part of your job as a CEO or as an owner of an organization, as a leader of the organization, is to make tough choices. And there
Yep.
is such a thing as a bad dollar, where that dollar ends up costing you money. You are
Yeah.
paying two, three,
Shadow costs
$4
sometimes.
to fix the problems that dollar brought in. So you really, really need to be cognizant of that. And if your business is in a place where you are so desperate for top line revenue
Yeah.
that you say, I will compromise standards, I will expose my team, I will do this, you need to go back home and look in the mirror and
Yeah.
think about that for a while, and what
or
structural
or at the very
fundamental
least
yeah,
know that you're doing it so that you can make better choices as things
yeah.
become available, right?
Like,
And that. So
I understand cash flow, and cash flow is king, right? Like,
love you, Colin.
yeah,
It's my
that
boy.
is the that's the thing that makes the world go round. But you got to really, really examine, if you're in a cash crunch situation where you cannot afford to say no, then you got to find a way to get back to where you have the privilege of saying that, right? Like, you
Yep.
have to be able to say
And
no
there is no
to
silver
revenue.
bullet. So sometimes you got
There
to
is none.
take the
It's
chin and then go move on when you got the cash flow. I get it,
it is
but
hard
be aware
work
of
and
it.
awkward conversations. That's all business is. And if you got into it expecting anything else, you're in the wrong game.
I called that my dating life until I got married. Like, yeah, it's 100%. So I digress. All right. Thank you so much, Ian. I love you to death. This might have to be a repeat one. Thank you so
Oh,
much. See
love
you,
it.
everybody.